Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to the Booms and Bust Show. My name is Jonathan Davis, and as ever, I'm here every week talking about what I'm seeing going on in the world from a free market, I would say correct thinking, libertarian point of view. I will point out the failings of socialism and Marxism and all the rest of it, as well as terrorism and such practices. I am recording this at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon on Monday the 27th of November. And do you remember when you went to uni and you saw these really cool kids wearing their handsome Che Guevara T-shirts, you know, with his designer stubble, his beret with the communist star on the front? Well, what I want you to do is go to the Twitter feed at Booms Busts Show, and incidentally, follow Booms Bust Show if you don't already. Click on the pinned tweet of this show, and then scroll down, and you'll see the first photo or picture that I'm using in the show, and it shows Che Guevara doing what he did a lot of. And just for now, I'll tell you that he's standing pointing a pistol while one of his soldier cronies has a rifle. There's two terrified young ladies standing in front of him, and just to the right of them are two dead young ladies that he's obviously just shot. As the guy says, maybe left-wingers should put an accurate photo of their Marxist hero, Che Guevara, on their stupid T-shirts. Now, today's show is going to be quite different to normal shows. I'm going to play an extended recording of what happened in Canada 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then towards the end of the show I'm going to read out what a newspaper had on a Yazidi woman who was sold as a sex slave. Both of these things are very moving, and they're difficult to hear, but probably for that reason they need to be presented. Taxpayers deserve to understand how delusional ideologues have taken over North American universities. And here we have Lindsay Shepherd, who is merely a postgraduate student herself, who is doing some lectures in critical thinking. And this is a part of the some hour-long discussion that she had with the head and other members of the faculty following her class, where she was putting two sides to a story. Bearing in mind, she was teaching a class to undergraduates of critical thinking. And I'm going to play you several minutes of this. You might want to turn the volume up. As I say, it's quite harrowing, and if you can try and remember to do so, remember to listen in for the very last phrase from the numpty interrogator academic.
Recorded of the meeting.
And why that might have been seen as problematic by some of the students, maybe even threatening?
I don't see how someone would rationally think it was threatening. I could see how it might challenge their existing ideas, but for me, that's the spirit of the university, is challenging ideas that you already have. And I don't know who this came from. I would be interested to see the original complaint or complaints, because I don't really have any context as to what exactly their problem was.
Sorry, can I?
The thing is, can you shield people from those ideas? Am I supposed to comfort them and make sure that they are insulated away from this? Like, is that what the point of this is? Because to me, that is so against what a university is about. So against it. I was not taking sides. I was presenting both arguments.
Okay. So the thing is about this is, if you're presenting something like this, you have to think about the kind of teaching climate that you're creating. And this is actually, these arguments are counter to the Canadian Human Rights Code. Ever since, and I know that you talked about C-16, ever since this passed, it is discriminatory to be targeting someone due to their gender identity or gender expression. So bringing something like that up in class, not critically, and I understand that you're trying to like...
It was critical.
No,
I introduced it critically.
how so? Like,
like I said, it was in the spirit of debate.
Okay, in the spirit of the debate is slightly different than being like, okay, this is like a problematic idea that we want to unpack.
But that's taking sides.
Yes.
Like, it's taking sides for me to be like, oh, look at this guy. Like, everything that comes out of his mouth is BS, but we're going to watch anyway.
Okay. So I understand the position that you're coming from and your positionality, but the reality is that it has created a toxic climate for some of the students. It's,
how many?
It's great that...
Ooh, like how many?
Okay.
One?
May I speak?
I have no concept of like how many people complained, like what their complaint was. You haven't showed me the complaint.
Yes, I understand that this is upsetting, but there's also confidentiality matters.
The number of people is
With respect.
confidential?
Yes.
Okay.
Is one or multiple students who've come forward saying that this is something that they were concerned about and that it made them uncomfortable. You're perfectly welcome to your own opinions, but when you're bringing it into the context of the classroom, that can become problematic. And that can become something that creates an unsafe learning environment for students.
But when they leave the university, they're going to be exposed to these ideas. So I don't see how I'm doing a disservice to the class by exposing them to ideas that are really out there. And I'm sorry I'm crying. I'm stressed out because this to me is so wrong. It's so wrong.
Can I mention the gendered violence, gendered and sexual violence policy?
Yeah, please.
So under that, gendered violence doesn't just include sexual violence, but it also includes targeting folks based on gender. So that includes transphobia, biphobia, homophobia. All those sorts of things are protected under the policy, and so those are things that Laurier has upheld as values as well as the Ontario Human Rights Code. And so those are things that we're responsible for not impacting our students in that way, and not spreading transphobia in that way.
Okay, so what I have a problem with is I didn't target anybody. Who did I target?
Trans folks.
How? By telling them ideas that are really out there? By telling them that? By telling them? Really?
It's not just telling them in legitimizing this as a valid perspective, as this is another valid perspective.
In a university, all perspectives are valid.
That's not necessarily true, Lindsay.
Well, this is something that's being debated in current society, and I don't feel the need to shield people from what's going on in society. Like,
okay.
To imagine that this is happening in university, it's just bad.
Okay, so just to give you a context, also within all of this that is happening, Laurier's being blanketed with white supremacist posters currently. There's another debate in society, which is whether or not North America should be a set of white nationalist states and that it should be ethnically cleansed of other people. That is also a current debate in society. Would you show something in your tutorial that you had, white supremacists and non-white supremacists debating whether or not other people should live in North America? Is that something that you would show?
If that was related to the content of the week and we were talking about right-wing speech bubbles, maybe.
Okay.
It depends on the content. Like, I mean, if there's really ideas that are existing out there like that, then, I mean, look, the thing is, like, I don't see what's transphobic about showing a video of Jordan Peterson. He's a real person. He's out there.
He is a real person, but he is a real person who has engaged in targeted behavior that, or targeting of trans students in a particular, like basically doxing them, if you know the term, like giving out their personal information so that they will be attacked, harassed, so that death threats will find them. This is something that he has done to his own students. He has done to other students. And this is also something that the students are aware of. So this is basically like playing, not to kind of do the thing where everything is kind of compared to Hitler, but this is like neutrally playing a speech by Hitler or Milo Yiannopoulos from Gamergate. This is the kind of thing that departmentally, in terms of like critical communication studies and in terms of the course of what we're trying to do, is diametrically opposed to everything that we've been talking about in the lectures. Was this one of the reasons that you wanted to do this? Because it was like a reaction to the lecture content?
No, we were talking about gendered language, and I was asking them to structure sentences using they or using his or her. And then we talked about the societal context of it.
Okay.
So I don't get why I'm being seen as transphobic by virtue, by proxy of me just saying, just stating, just exposing people to an idea. I don't get how that label is not attached to me. I really don't.
It's more about the effect rather than the intention. It's that, like, obviously that wasn't your intention, but nevertheless, it disturbed and upset students enough.
So everything's about those students who are disturbed? Everything is catered to them?
Can I just
please,
offer a
Rick.
different perspective? Was this a tutorial based on looking at grammar?
Mm-hmm.
And it was focused on the use of pronouns and the use of grammar.
Mm-hmm.
Is grammar not something that's not really subject to debate?
The they and the his or her, it's a huge debate right now. Can we use they in the singular?
Yeah, but you do know that they has actually been used in the singular.
Yeah, that was in the
grammatically.
video I showed to the class, and that's
Okay.
just a point I made. And the thing is, what's kind of funny is I disagree with Jordan Peterson. I disagree, but you guys seem to think that I'm like pro Jordan Peterson or something. It's pretty funny.
Well, do you understand how what happened was contrary to... Sorry, Adrian, what was the policy? The gendered and sexual violence policy? Like, do you understand how...
But, sorry, what did I violate in that policy?
So, gender-based violence, transphobia in that policy, causing harm to trans students by framing their identity as invalid or their pronouns as invalid,
Or something up for
potentially
debate?
invalid,
So I caused harm
which
and
is
violence.
under the Ontario Human Rights Code a protected thing, and also something that Laurier holds as a value.
Okay. So, by proxy of me showing you the video, I'm transphobic and I caused harm and violence. So be it. I can't do anything to control that.
Okay, so that's not something that you have an issue with? The fact that that happened? Like,
I mean,
Are you
I
sorry that it
know
happened?
that I know in my heart, and I know I expressed to the class that I'm not transphobic. And if any of them, I don't know, again, I don't know what they said, but I don't think I gave away any kind of political position of mine. I remained very neutral. And,
that's kind of the problem.
So, Laurier University in Canada was berating this young lady academic for doing her job. And at the end, this young lady is sobbing, and it's clear throughout the whole discussion she is aghast at the university's temerity to question fairness. She can't, everything she's grown up to believe in what is right and wrong is being thrown out of the window in that conversation. And Lindsay Shepherd says, I remained neutral, and this astonishing, socialist, disgusting academic says, well, that's kind of the problem. You literally couldn't make it up. And yet, this is what's happening in the higher education institutions in North America. I saw this on Twitter at the weekend, and I thought it was really cool. A half-black man has just been president of the USA. A black woman was First Lady. A black woman was Attorney General. A black man was Attorney General before her. A black woman is amongst the top 10 wealthiest self-made women in the USA. There are black politicians, black judges, black doctors, black athletes, black entertainers, black attorneys, and black police officers. And despite being only 13% of the total population of the USA, blacks are overly represented in the majority of commercials, television shows, movies. Blacks have BET, Congressional Black Caucus, UNCF, and many other blacks-only organizations. And despite all of this, they have the audacity to say that racism exists. Only a feeble-minded fool would believe that. What do you say to that, Doc Brown?
In my opinion, real rap, it should reflect the hardships in life, you know, of which I've had my unfair share. Okay? I've had some dark times, right, where I used to think it was like me against the world, you know? And in those times, you got to remember, it's not you, it's them. Because when you're down and out and you're really up against it, just remember the basics. It's a mantra, repeatedly say this. You're not a loser, it's just everybody's racist. Yeah, that's right, I said it. Why do you think nobody ever give you any credit? Why you last on the list of your doctor's patients? Chronological, or is your surgery racist? What type of dog shits on the pavement in front of your house? Alsatian, racist. Say you're typing in a search engine, trying to write haters with a Z at the end, and your computer goes, did you mean haters? That's how you know Google's racist. How come every time an igloo's made it's always white? Eskimos, racist. So now you know the truth at its plainest. Your car won't start, engine, racist. Your team don't pick you, these guys, racist. Jeans don't fit you, Levi's, racist. If you can't lose weight every time you try it, I guarantee your diet is racist. On your birthday it rained in places. Fuck the clouds, the whole sky is racist. You got an iPod, shuffling a playlist that ain't picked reggae in a while? Racist. How come every time you get to the queue, you're the last in the queue, dude? That queue's racist. And then when you get to the front, the staff say, hey, thanks for waiting, that's racist. Cause the whole post office are skanks. Why do you think they try and sell you second-class stamps? 2 words, institutional racism. You go Nando's, suddenly they make chicken. And you might want couscous or just soup. Too late, man, they already judged you. When you're down and out and you're really up against it, just remember the basics. It's a mantra, repeatedly say this. You're not a loser, it's just everybody's racist. I've been Doc Brown, thank you very much.
Well, some might say that says it all. I've been talking a lot about uranium mining shares over the last few weeks, and they've been on a tear, in fact, in the last few weeks. But in the scheme of things, they've hardly even started. But I do see it very interesting about what's one of the areas for demand for electricity that's going to absolutely explode over coming years is, of course, electric vehicles. Just in October alone, the number of electric vehicle sales in Germany is up 48% year on year, and in the UK, 45%. In the third quarter 2017, electric vehicle sales surged globally 63% year on year. In China, they went up 104%, according to Bloomberg. Now, of course, it's still tiny numbers. I get that. But you don't need many years of 30, 40, 50% growth until you've got a sizable proportion of the overall market. And indeed, when you look at people like Bloomberg or even so-called official bodies like the International Energy Authority, the World Bank, etc., they are forecasting somewhere between 60 million and 100 million electric vehicles on our roads within around 10 years from now. Think about that. 70, 80, 90 million electric vehicles. If that isn't going to need more electricity generation, I don't know what is. Is it going to come from solar, coal, liquid gas? It might possibly come from liquid gas, although I doubt it. I really don't think that many cars want to have big gas tanks if instead they could just have a battery. So that tells me that there's going to be massive electricity generated by nuclear power. Therefore, there's your demand for the uranium that the miners will be producing. Listeners in the UK, we had, of course, the party political broadcast last week. In other words, the annual budget from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the finance minister. And there's a somewhat interesting chart I'm putting there. They call it the average effect of government decisions on borrowing. It's a little bit complicated chart. Essentially, the yellow is saying that on average, over the last several years, budgets have been slight giveaways, which means they've had to borrow some money. But in each of the last 2 or 3 years of a forecast period, they were takeaways. So they they should have reduced borrowing. Instead, they just increased taxes. And in the budget we've just had, we've got some major cash handouts in order for basically Philip Hammond and Theresa May to save their jobs, so that the rebelling Tory MPs would let them stay in their job because they're spending money that they don't have. In theory, in 5 years' time, there'll be a cash takeaway, which of course will not happen because that's when we'll be having a general election. The idea that the Tories are fiscally prudent, what an absolute joke. I had an argument about this with that smarmy individual, James Max, on Talk Radio just yesterday. It's on my YouTube channel. It's quite an interesting discussion. At one point, I even say to him, I recall, look, this whole question, James, that you've posed is what can we do to make the system fairer? I've given you a solution and you're questioning my integrity. And he goes on to say, well, I'm not doing that. I'm just disagreeing with you. Well, you listen to it. You tell me whether or not you agree with me, that I was feeling at the time that the guy was questioning my integrity. And basically he was, because he's one of the ultimate cronies. And he just hates it. He's ex-City, by the way. He hates it when anyone questions the standard consensus or questions the amount of money we've handed to the bankers. the budget in the form of the Chancellor, Her Majesty's Treasury, the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is a so-called independent think tank, which basically is meant to be there to dream up or to make the economic forecasts using their models. What a load of nonsense. They show that we remain in very low economic growth for the next 5 years. That means from 2008 to 2023, we have slow or no growth. Excuse me, listener, but that's the definition of an economic depression. And as well you know, I've been saying for months, indeed anyone who knows me, I've been saying for years, we are in economic depression. And now the powers that be are finally admitting it. Of course, they are blaming all the wrong people. I am giving the solution, and the solution is that we bring back capitalism. We ban quantitative easing. We let the market set interest rates. We ban student loans, which means fees would plummet, making it cheaper to go to university. We end Help to Buy, which would bring down the cost of accommodation. People would then be able to spend money. We bring back Glass-Steagall, and we separate investment banking from retail banking, which kept the global economy basically well for 60 years. Within 10 years of them closing down Glass-Steagall and allowing investment banks to buy out retail banks, they brought down the economic and financial system. So those are the solutions. Of course, it would create major recession for a couple of years, but then it would bring about economic prosperity for 30 years. But instead, we're in long-term economic depression. And until people start shouting from the rooftops what I am saying, then I assure you nothing will happen. Until you retweet me when I am tweeting exactly those points, until you retweet the show tweets, then no one will get to hear about these thoughts, this thinking. They will never bring back capitalism. The next chart shows, according to the announcements by the Fed, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Swiss National Bank, and the Chinese Bank, the People's Bank of China, it shows when QE turns to be QT, from quantitative easing to quantitative tightening, that not only are they no longer printing money, but they're actually repaying some debt. Now we know that when they stop printing money, this has a negative effect on the economy and on markets, as it did in 2015. And anyone who listened to my show around that time, I was hugely negative, rightly so, partly because we had quantitative tightening. We've had massive quantitative easing for the last couple of years. That's one of the reasons why markets have shot up, and indeed why we bought, and why we have inflation. But if it is true that we go to quantitative tightening by early 2019, well, expect recession and expect stock markets to crash. However, is it realistic that they will actually not print money in a recession? I don't think it is realistic as it happens. I think any signs of a slowdown and they'll print with abandon. However, that is currently based on their pronouncements. In a similar vein, Bloomberg announces that Euro area companies are creating jobs at the fastest pace in 17 years. Wow. The fastest pace since the dot-com boom. And yet the European Central Bank has printed QE of $1,000 billion in the last 18 months. And they're still printing $30 to $60 billion a month. Really? European Central Bank? It was years ago, it was criminal. Goodness knows what you call it now. Markets. Gold. I said last week that gold needs to surpass $13.05, $13.10 before we know anything. It is broadly flat on the week. It's up a little bit this morning. So we don't yet know. It hasn't even got to $1,300 yet. We don't yet know if it'll get to $13.05 to $13.10. If it does, and if it gets above $13.10, and it stays above for a couple of days, and especially at the close on Friday evening in Britain, the New York closes, of course, at 9 p.m. London time. If it's above $13 to $10 on Friday evening this week, then it's very likely that gold and precious metals generally are in a significant bull market. And junior miners could rally 50 to 100% from where they are today. But as I say, it has to get to 13.05, 13.10. It's a massive, massive resistance, and then it has to breach it. If it goes up and then falls back down again, do you know what? You could be looking at sub $1,200. You really could. I want to make a point about emerging markets. The fund that I particularly like, there are lots of them, but the one that we've been using is Franklin Templeton Emerging Markets Investment Trust. It's up nearly 100% since early 2016. Up nearly 100%. It is now, if you look at the chart, it is now practically touching at $18. The long-term downtrend from the early part of the decade when the crash started. The thing is, medium term, it ought to blast through. But because it's up to this huge resistance, expect there to be turmoil at this point. I wouldn't be surprised to see a pullback, but that doesn't mean there is going to be a pullback. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised to see one. And again, if you look at my personal Twitter feed, at Jonathan Davis, where the O is a 0, my pinned tweet is about emerging markets. And you can see I've got tweet after tweet over several months showing what the outlook was for this. So I was expecting it to get to $18 many months ago when it was, 50% lower than it is now. Or 30, 40% lower than it is now. It's risen 50, 60% since I first tweeted about it. But, it does seem that it's in a bull market. It's in a longer term uptrend. And whatever happens to it, relatively short term, expect it to continue rising in the longer term. Especially while copper continues to do well and oil continues to do well. And indeed, oil's in the sort of mid-50s, high 50s even. I've been saying for weeks and weeks, it could pull back to the low 50s, but it's in a major uptrend. And I really wouldn't be surprised to see oil get up to $75 by early 2019. That will be a 200% rise in oil over 3 years. If that isn't inflationary, I don't know what is. On Friday, I put out November's Booms and Busts report. I send it out by email. It's free. If you're not getting it, send me an email to jd at the boomsandbustsreport.com. Let me just check that. 1 second, please. I just want to make sure that I've got the right... No, I beg your pardon, I got the wrong one. That's what I was checking. I got it wrong last week as well. Very silly of me. JD at the boomsandbustsshow.com. JD at the boomsandbustsshow.com. Just send me an email with your name and email address. I will... you will never be junk mailed. So you do want to receive the Booms and Busts report. If you get a chance, and you haven't done it yet, under that pinned tweet of the show, at Booms Busts Show, please click on the iTunes. Please star rate. Indeed, if you want to give a review of the show, that'll be fantastic. You know, if you really feel for what I'm saying here, then please get the message out. Do a review on iTunes, star rate the show on iTunes, retweet the show on Twitter. I get 6 or 7 people every week, thank you very much, who retweet the show. Surely this show should be getting 50 retweets every week. It's the only way more and more people are going to get to hear about the show. I can tell you that the number of listeners is unaltered for about 2 months. So, you know, it's wonderful that you guys listen. Clearly you get something from it, but there's no one new coming on to listen to the podcast. So come on, guys, get out there, start retweeting and star rate the show. The LGBT agenda gets even more crazy by the day. It seems to me, or as I've seen here, the final destination for this will be the acceptance of incest and paedophilia. Look at that photo of an event for inclusiveness training. This is in Ontario, and it's no longer LGBT, it's now LGGBD TTTIBRAAPP, which means what? Lesbian, gay, gender queer, bisexual, demisexual, what on earth is that? Transgender, transsexual, two-spirit? What does two-spirit mean? Intersex? What? Bigender? Resexual? What on earth? Resexual? Oh, this is amazing. Asexual? What does that then say? Allies? World War II people? What? Pansexual? What, you want to have sex with a pan? And polyamorous. You want to have sex with Pollyanna? She's an 11-year-old girl for... Oh, it's not that. Oh, okay. This is unbelievable. My goodness me. And now I'm going to finish off with Nadia Murad on how she was kidnapped and forced into being a sex slave for Islamic State. This is quite difficult to listen to, So if you have any qualms at all, you might want to end it now. Nadia Murad grew up dreaming of owning a beauty salon, the youngest of 11 children in a Yazidi family in northwest Iraq. She took photos of all the brides in her tiny village, studying their makeup and hair. Her favourite was of a brunette woman with curls piled high atop her head. But after Islamic State overtook her village in August 2014, that dream died. Nadia was captured, enslaved, sold, raped and tortured, alongside thousands of her people, in an effort to decimate their religion. She then managed a miraculous escape and is now a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, fighting for freedom and justice for her people. Her new book, The Last Girl, My Story of Captivity and My Fight Against the Islamic State, published by Hachette in Australia, tells the story of how she and her family were living peacefully in the farming community of Kocho, near the Syrian border, when IS first rose to power. Her clan came from a long line of sheep herders and wheat farmers, residing in a house made of mud brick rooms, quote, lined up like beads on a necklace and connected by doorways with no doors. In the summer, her family, including her mother, 8 brothers and 2 sisters, stretched out on mattresses on the roof of their house, whispering to one another until they fell asleep under the moon. Think Waltons. But 3 years ago, on August the 14th, after a 2-week siege, IS ordered the entire population of Kocho to a schoolyard, where they asked the local leader if the villagers would convert to Islam. Notice, not Islamic State. Islam. Yazidism is one of the oldest faiths in Mesopotamia, dating back 6,000 years, and has elements in common with many religions of the Middle East, Zoroastrianism, which frankly I've never heard of, Islam and Judaism. The local leader told the IS commander that they would never convert, believing his people would then be evacuated to a nearby town. Instead, the men of the village were loaded onto trucks, ordered to dig a shallow grave, and executed in one afternoon. The woman, still in the schoolyard, could hear the shots just a short distance away. The older women and children were separated from the younger woman. Miss Murad was ripped away from her mother, whom she would never see again. On the way out of town, Nadia, who was 21, screamed in an effort to stop one of the soldiers from grabbing her breast each time he walked by her on the bus. "Why did you scream?" a militant asked Miss Murad. "I was scared. This guy touched me." "What do you think you're here for?" asked the commander. "You are an infidel." A sabiya, which is translated as sex slave. "And you belong to the Islamic State now, so get used to it." Then he spat in her face, took out a cigarette and extinguished it on her shoulder. He lit another one and put it out on her stomach. Then he slapped her twice across the face and warned, "Never make another sound again." In the dark, crowded room of a home where she and the other women were being held, Miss Murad asked what awaited her. Another woman who had been there longer told her to look for the stains on the bathroom wall, where others had tried to kill themselves rather than be sold as slaves. She had never heard of IS before they came to her village, and had no idea that the group had been planning her fate for a long time. Attacking macho and taking girls to use as sex slaves wasn't a spontaneous decision, she wrote. IS planned it all, how they would come into our homes, what made a girl more or less valuable, which militants deserved a sabia as incentive. She paraphrases an Islamic State pamphlet which stated that, quote, sabia can be given as gifts and sold at the whim of the owner, for they are merely property, unquote. She wrote, quote, an owner can have sex with a prepubescent slave. It says, if she is fit for intercourse, unquote. Sitting in a house surrounded by men with guns, Nadia contemplated killing herself. Instead, she made a pact with her two older sisters, Dimal and Adka. We would take the first opportunity to escape. When an enormous man with calves as thick as tree trunks selected Miss Murad as his slave, she screamed and tried to pull away. He didn't look like a man, he looked like a monster. When she spied a skinnier man's calves from her place on the ground, she begged him to take her, hoping his slight size might save her. She's mine, the skinny man told the larger man. And that was that. Miss Murad was registered as a slave, complete with a photo ID that would be dispersed among the fighters if she were to run away, and taken to the home of her new owner, a high-ranking Islamic State judge named Haji Salman. You're my fourth sabia, he told her. The other three are Muslim now. I did that for them. Yazidis are infidels. That's why we're doing this. It's to help you. Haji Salman told her to shower, put on a dress that came only to her knee, an immodest change from her normal wardrobe, and you note, not a burqa, and use hair removal cream all over her body. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I knew that if I didn't wear any makeup, I would be punished, so I looked through the pile left for me. Normally, my niece and I would have been thrilled at the new makeup, which was a brand I recognised and could very rarely afford. At Haji Salman's, I could barely stand to look at myself in the mirror. I put on some pink lipstick and eye makeup, just enough, I hoped, to avoid being beaten. When he raped her, he was loud enough for all the guests to hear. He shouted as if he wanted all of Mosul to know that he was finally raping his sabia, and no one interfered. His touch was exaggerated, forceful, meant to hurt me. I was like a child crying out for my mother. He hit me when he was displeased with the way I cleaned his home, when he was angry about something from work, if I cried or kept my eyes closed while he raped me. He humiliated her, spreading honey on his toes and making her lick it off. And he always warned her, if you try to escape, you will regret it. I promise you, the punishment won't be good. She tried anyway. She put on an abaya, the robe-like covering that devout Muslim women wear, and crawled out of a window. A guard saw her. Haji Salman was summoned, and he whipped Miss Murad's naked body, and then let his sentry of 6 men gang rape her until she was unconscious. The last thing she saw before blacking out was one of the guards placing his glasses on a table before he climbed into her bed. Over the next week, she was passed to 6 other men who raped and beat her, before being given to one who planned on taking her to Syria. But first, he needed to buy her more clothing. Left alone for the first time in 2 weeks, she impulsively tried the front door. It didn't budge. But Miss Murad gave it one last shove and, quote, nearly fell over when it swung open, unquote. Her captor had, for reasons unknown, left it unlocked. She started walking and didn't stop. Dressed in the abaya with her face covered like other Muslim women, she wasn't an obvious target. Although she was shaking and could barely breathe, she was so terrified. She walked all evening and into the night. When she arrived at the outskirts of town, the poorer section, she felt slightly calmer. If any Sunni in Mosul was going to help me, it was most likely to be a poor Sunni, maybe a family who had stayed only because they didn't have the money to leave. She spied a house that looked vaguely like her own back in Kocho and knocked on the door. "I beg you to help me," she said, not knowing if she had been saved or was about to be destroyed. One of the men grabbed her and pulled her into the home. "It's safer in here," he said. "You shouldn't talk about those kinds of things outside." The clan, who despised IS, let her stay with them for a few days while they prepared a plan. One of the sons, Nasser, would drive her out of IS territory. If anyone asked, he would pretend to be her husband. The plan worked. Using fake IDs and a cover story about visiting family in Kurdish-held Iraq, Miss Murad and Nasser made it past the many checkpoints until she was reunited with 2 of her brothers at a refugee camp. Her struggle wasn't over yet. As news filtered in with new arrivals to the camp, she eventually learned what had happened to her other loved ones. Her mother had been shot and buried in a shallow grave along with 85 other Yazidi women. 5 of her brothers had been executed. Her nephew had been kidnapped by IS and would be brainwashed into fighting for them. Her 2 sisters were still in captivity. Luckily, another one of her brothers was found in a hospital nearby. She refused to tell her 3 surviving brothers the details of her ordeal, knowing it would torment them to think of their wives, still in captivity, being raped. I cried every day. When I dreamed, it was always about being returned to IS and having to escape again. More than 3,000 women and children are still enslaved, and 300,000 Yazidis are displaced. Miss Murad is now living in a town near Stuttgart, Germany, through a program that took in 1,100 Yazidi refugees in 2015. Her 2 sisters were also finally liberated from IS. Dimal, 33, lives with Nadia Murad in Germany, while Adka, 30, is in a Kurdistan refugee camp. Now, Nadia Murad is hoping her book will reach an even wider audience than her speech before the UN. All proceeds from the book sales will go towards supporting survivors and bringing IS to justice. I think there was a reason God helped me escape. And I don't take my freedom for granted. The terrorists didn't think that Yazidi girls would have the courage to tell the world every detail of what they did to us. We defy them by not letting their crimes go unanswered. Every time I tell my story, I feel that I'm taking some power away from the terrorists. I'll see you next week.